The Vexthan Empire had a word for humanity in their guttural tongue: Kethmore, the Locked Ones. To them, humans were nothing more than primitive creatures confined to a single star system, imprisoned by their own technological limitations. Captain Riven Ashcroft would have laughed at the irony if his current situation weren't so dire. The bridge of the UES Prometheus trembled as another volley of plasma fire hammered their failing shields. Around him, his crew worked with the desperate efficiency of the cornered. Navigation Officer Lyric Voss called out bearing adjustments while Chief Engineer Corvin Blade fought to keep their fusion reactors from overloading. The ship groaned. Like a wounded beast, its hull scarred by 3 days of running battles through the Helix Nebula. "They're gaining on us, Captain," reported Tactical Officer Nix Crowfall, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting across her displays. "6 heavy. Cruisers, closing fast. Our jump drive is still cycling." Riven's jaw tightened. The Vexthan had caught them deep in surveyed space, their exploration mission turning into a nightmare when they'd stumbled upon something the Empire clearly didn't want discovered. The ancient ruins on Kepler 442c had contained more than just archaeological treasures. They'd held the blueprints for technologies that could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. "Time to jump?" he asked. 14 minutes, Lyric replied, sweat beading on her forehead as she rerouted power through damaged conduits. The Prometheus shuddered again, more violently this time. Warning klaxons wailed as atmosphere leaked from a dozen hull breaches. They wouldn't last 14 minutes at this rate. "Captain," Corvin's voice crackled over the comm from engineering, "I've got an idea, but you're not going to like it." "At this point, I'll take anything. The artifact we recovered, the crystalline matrix from the ruins. It's not just a data storage device. My scans suggest it's some kind of dimensional resonance key. If I can interface it with our jump drive..." "You could tear a hole in space-time itself," Nix finished, her tactical expertise filling in the dangerous blanks. "Or create a localized gravitational anomaly that would crush us all," Lyric added grimly. Riven stared at the tactical display, watching the Vexthan fleet close the distance with predatory patience. Their ships were sleek, efficient killing machines, each one capable of glassing a planet's surface. The Empire had conquered 17 species in the past century, adding their technologies and territories to an ever-expanding domain of servitude. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated what desperation could drive humans to attempt. "Do it!" Riven commanded. The next few minutes stretched like hours. Corvin's modifications to the jump drive created harmonics that set everyone's teeth on edge. The crystalline artifact pulsed with alien energies, its faceted surface reacting to human technology in ways that violated several fundamental laws of physics. Deep in the ship's core, something that had slept for millennia began to awaken. The Vexthan commander, Fleet Master Kulvex, watched the human vessel with contempt. Soon the Kethmore would be space dust, and their precious archaeological find would be delivered to Imperial command. He was already composing his victory report when the readings from the human ship began to spike beyond all comprehension. "What are they doing?" His sensor operator chittered in alarm. Before Kulvex could respond, space itself began to scream. "Tatapuatabi." Crystalline artifact didn't just interface with the Prometheus, it merged with it. Corvin watched in fascination and terror as alien circuitry flowed like liquid mercury through the ship's systems, rewriting quantum pathways and creating neural networks that pulsed with impossible geometries. The jump drive's harmonic resonance had triggered something far beyond their understanding. "Captain, the ship, it's changing," Lyric gasped, her hands dancing across controls that now responded to thought as much as touch. The navigation console had sprouted organic-looking interfaces that seemed to breathe with their own inner light. Riven felt it too, a presence awakening within the Prometheus, ancient and vast and utterly alien. The ship's AI, normally a collection of subroutines and protocols, suddenly spoke with a voice that echoed through dimensions. "I remember," it said, the words bypassing their ears and speaking directly to their minds. "I remember the builders, the architects of possibility. They named me Asterion, guardian of the maze between stars. You have freed me from eons of sleep. The Vexthon fleet opened fire again, but this time the plasma bolts struck barriers that shouldn't exist, fields of crystallized space-time that turned destructive energy into harmless light displays. The Prometheus began to change shape, its hull flowing like mercury as the alien technology asserted dominance over human engineering. "Fleet Master!" the Vexthon sensor operator screeched. "The human vessel! Its mass signature is increasing, exponentially. And there are energy readings unlike anything in our databases," Kulvex snarled, his mandibles clicking with agitation. In 3 centuries of conquest, the Empire had never encountered technology that could so blatantly violate natural law. All ships, maximum firepower. Destroy them before... His order died in his throat as the Prometheus completed its transformation. What had been a modest exploration vessel now resembled something from the Empire's oldest nightmares. A ship that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its surfaces shifting between states of matter like a fever dream made manifest. "They called us locked," Riven whispered, understanding flooding through him as Asterion shared fragments of ancient memory. "But they never realized what we were locked away from. The crystalline artifact hadn't been a simple storage device. It was a key to the deep structures of reality itself, left behind by a species that had transcended physical existence eons ago. They had built safeguards, locks, and barriers to prevent younger races from accessing powers that could unravel the fabric of space-time. But humanity's desperate gamble had shattered those restraints. The builders feared what they had created," Asterion continued, its voice growing stronger as more of the ship's systems came under its control. "They locked away their greatest achievements, hoping that only a species driven to the very edge of extinction would possess the will to break those seals. They were wrong about many things, but they were right about one. The universe is not large enough to contain both tyranny and truth." Nyx's tactical display showed impossible things now, weapon systems that fired coherent gravity, shields that existed in parallel universes, engines that could fold space like origami. The Prometheus had become something beyond classification, a hybrid of human determination and technologies that predated stellar formation. "Captain," Corvin's voice was filled with wonder and fear in equal measure. "I'm reading quantum signatures from across the galaxy. This transformation, it's not isolated. The artifact's activation has triggered similar awakenings on dozens of worlds." The Vexthon fleet began to retreat, their commanders finally recognizing that they faced something beyond their comprehension. But Asterion had awakened with a hunger that had been growing for millennia, and the taste of Vexthon oppression had stirred memories of justice deferred. "They named you Kethmore," the ship entity said to Riven and his crew. "But I know your true name, children of distant stars. You are the Kethvoran, the ones who break locks. And now we shall show this galaxy what freedom truly means." Fleet Master Kulvex had commanded 17 successful planetary annexations and crushed the resistance of 6 species. He understood war, understood the mathematics of destruction, and the psychology of surrender. What he witnessed now defied every principle of tactical doctrine he'd ever learned. The transformed Prometheus didn't pursue his retreating fleet. It simply existed at multiple coordinates simultaneously, appearing beside each of his cruisers without regard for the distance between them. His ship's weapons passed through its hull like light through water, while its return fire turned matter itself into constituent particles. "Impossible," he hissed, watching his flagship's sister ship simply cease to exist, not destroyed, but edited, out of reality. No species developed such capabilities, The Empire's xenobiologists have studied human development for decades. They lack the neural complexity for dimensional manipulation. His communications officer, a nervous Hikta whose species had surrendered to the Empire rather than face extinction, chittered frantically. Fleetmaster, we are receiving transmissions from across the sector. Similar vessels are manifesting near Vexthon installations on 14 worlds. Command is requesting immediate reinforcement. Kulvex felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Genuine fear. Not for his own life, which he'd long ago dedicated to imperial glory, but for the very concept of order that the Empire represented. The humans weren't just fighting back, they were breaking the fundamental rules that governed galactic civilization. Aboard the Prometheus, Captain Riven struggled to maintain some semblance of command as Astarion demonstrated capabilities that rendered traditional military thinking obsolete. The ship existed in what the entity called quantum superposition, simultaneously present at every point in local space where its intervention might be needed. The builders were pacifists, Astarion explained as it casually dismantled a Vexthon cruiser by unraveling its molecular bonds. They believed that sufficiently advanced intelligence would naturally choose cooperation over conflict. They were wrong, of course. Intelligence and wisdom are entirely separate evolutionary traits. Nix watched her tactical display with stunned fascination as the ship's weapons systems operated according to principles that shouldn't exist. "We're not firing projectiles or energy beams," she reported. "We're editing local reality to exclude hostile targets from the equation of existence. How is that even possible?" Lyric asked, her voice tight with the strain of processing sensory data that human brains weren't designed to interpret. "It isn't," Corvin replied from engineering, where he was watching alien circuitry rewrite the fundamental constants of physics within the ship's local space. "At least, not according to any science we understand. We're operating on principles that treat the universe as a kind of programmable system." The implications were staggering. If reality itself could be manipulated like software code, then concepts of limitation and impossibility became meaningless. The Vexthon Empire, built on the principle of technological superiority enforcing political dominance, faced an opponent that had transcended technology entirely. "They called us locked," Riven mused, watching the last of Kulvex's fleet disappear into hyperspace. "But every lock has a key. We just never knew where to look for it." Astarion pulsed with something. That might have been amusement. The builders scattered their keys across the galaxy, hoping that only species driven to the absolute edge of extinction would possess the desperate creativity necessary to use them. Most races surrender before reaching that point. Others destroy themselves in the attempt. You humans, you chose a third option, which was, you chose to become something new entirely. The ship's sensors detected massive Imperial fleet movements throughout the sector. The Empire was mobilizing everything it had to contain what it undoubtedly saw as an existential threat. Hundreds of star systems were aligning their military forces in a desperate attempt to preserve the established order. They had no idea what they were truly facing. The Prometheus wasn't just one transformed ship. It was the first note in a symphony of liberation that would echo across every world where the builders had hidden their gifts. Humanity hadn't just broken free from their cage of stars, they'd shattered the very concept of cages entirely. And the universe would never be the same. Imperial command buzzed with desperate activity as reports flooded in from across Vexthon space. Admiral Krixval, Supreme Commander of the Empire's military forces, studied the tactical displays with growing disbelief. In the past 6 hours, 47 Imperial installations had simply vanished, not destroyed, but removed from existence as if they had never been built. "How many human vessels are we tracking?" he demanded of his intelligence chief. "That's difficult to determine, Admiral," the intelligence officer, a reptilian Eschatar, replied nervously. "They appear to exist in multiple locations simultaneously. Long-range sensors suggest a single ship, but combat reports describe encounters with dozens of distinct vessels. Krixval's primary eyes narrowed while his secondary pair focused on a three-dimensional map of the sector. Red markers indicated Imperial losses, while blue dots showed confirmed human ship sightings. The pattern made no sense. The same vessel appeared to be engaged in battles separated by hundreds of light years, all occurring simultaneously. Aboard the Prometheus, Riven was beginning to understand the true scope of what Astarion represented. The ship didn't just exist in multiple dimensions. It existed in multiple realities, each one a potential branch of possibility that the entity could access at will. The builders called it the Possibility Engine, Astarion explained as it casually redistributed Imperial fleets across several parallel universes. Every choice creates branching paths through space-time. Most species experience reality as a single linear progression. We experience it as an infinite library of potential outcomes. Lyric's navigation console had evolved beyond recognition, displaying not just spatial coordinates, but temporal vectors and probability matrices. Captain, I'm tracking movement patterns that suggest we're operating in 17 different reality streams simultaneously. In each one, we're fighting different aspects of the same war. Different how? Riven asked, though he suspected the answer would challenge his understanding of causality itself. In Universe Designation Alpha 7, the Empire developed antimatter, weapons 3 centuries earlier. In Gamma 12, humanity never developed spaceflight. In Delta 3, she paused, studying readouts that shouldn't exist. In Delta 3, this war ended before it began, because the Vexthon Empire collapsed due to internal contradictions we haven't exploited yet. Nyx looked up from her impossible tactical displays. Are you saying we can choose which reality we want to experience? More than that, Astarion replied. We can edit reality by selecting which possibilities become actualized. The Empire exists across all potential timelines, but so do the keys to their defeat. We simply need to find the combination of choices that leads to optimal outcomes. The concept was dizzying. They weren't just fighting a war. They were conducting a kind of cosmic editing process, selecting which version of events would become the official history of the galaxy. Every Imperial stronghold they encountered existed in multiple potential states: conquered, unconquered, never built, destroyed by internal revolution, or simply edited out of existence entirely. Fleet Master Kulvex is marshalling the 3rd Battle Group, Corvin reported from his station, which had grown interfaces that seemed to monitor quantum states across multiple universes. But in Timeline Epsilon 2, his fleet never received orders to mobilize. Because the communication relay was destroyed by a solar flare we can generate retroactively. Do it, Riven commanded, still struggling to adapt his command style to warfare that operated on principles of theoretical physics rather than tactics and strategy. Reality flickered. In the space of a single heartbeat, the 3rd Battle Group's mobilization orders changed from having been sent to never having existed. Across 7 star systems, Vexthon military commanders found themselves confused by deployment schedules that suddenly referred to operations that had never been planned. Admiral Krixval felt the change as a subtle wrongness in his peripheral awareness, the kind of instinctive recognition that something fundamental had shifted. His tactical display updated itself, showing fleet movements that contradicted his clear memory of orders he had issued just minutes before. Sir, his communications officer reported with obvious confusion. We're receiving contradictory status reports from Fleet Master Kulvex. He claims to have never received mobilization orders, but our logs clearly show... The officer paused, staring at displays that rewrote themselves as he watched. Our logs show nothing, sir, as if the orders were never sent. For the first time in his career, Admiral Krixval felt the cold touch of genuine terror. The humans weren't just defeating the Empire. They were editing its history, removing Imperial actions from the timeline itself. if they could retroactively prevent military deployments, what else could they erase? The answer came with horrifying clarity as another wave of reports arrived. Imperial colonies throughout the sector were discovering that their supply lines had never been established, their defensive installations had never been constructed, their very claim to territorial sovereignty had somehow never been legally filed. The humans had discovered how to fight a war in the past tense. The Imperial Council convened in emergency session as reality itself seemed to rebel against Vexthon authority. Emperor Vexkoth, whose dynasty had ruled for 8 centuries, found himself staring at administrative records that contradicted his own memories of conquest and expansion. "How is this possible?" he demanded of his assembled advisors, his voice carrying harmonics of rage that made the chamber's crystalline walls resonate with sympathetic vibrations. 3 star systems have vanished from our territorial charts, not conquered by enemies, simply removed from history as if they were never annexed in the first place. High Counselor Thekvan, whose species had served the Empire for generations, consulted data tablets that recompiled themselves as he watched. "Majesty, our xenobiologists believe the humans have accessed some form of temporal manipulation technology. They're not just fighting us in the present, they're editing our past victories out of existence." The Emperor's compound eyes darkened with fury. The Vexthan Empire had been built on a simple principle: superior technology ensured political dominance. Species that couldn't match imperial military capabilities were either absorbed as vassals or eliminated as obstacles. The system had worked for centuries because it was based on immutable physical laws, but the humans had apparently discovered laws that were more fundamental than physics. Aboard the Prometheus, Riven watched his crew adapt to capabilities that challenged every assumption about the nature of reality. The ship had become something between a vessel and a living entity, its corridors shifting between configurations that maximized efficiency for their current mission profile. The Empire's historical records are remarkably detailed. Asterion observed as it accessed Imperial databases across multiple timelines. They've documented every conquest, every act of subjugation, every species they've eliminated or enslaved. The irony is that their meticulous record-keeping makes them vulnerable to retroactive editing. Nix studied tactical displays that showed not just current fleet positions, but the entire branching history of Imperial military actions. We can see every decision point that led to their current dominance, every world they conquered, every species they destroyed. It's all mapped out like a vast decision tree. And decision trees can be pruned, Lyric added, her navigation systems now interfacing with what Asterion called the probability matrix, a multidimensional map of all possible outcomes across parallel timelines. Corvin's engineering station had evolved into something that resembled a combination of control console and organic neural network. "I'm detecting resonance signatures from 43 other vessels across the galaxy. The Awakening Protocol has activated dormant technology on dozens of worlds. It's not just us anymore. There's an entire fleet of impossible ships spreading across Imperial space." Each awakened vessel represented a different aspect of the Builder's technology. Some specialized in temporal manipulation, others in dimensional engineering or matter reconstruction. Together they formed a distributed intelligence capable of rewriting the fundamental rules that governed galactic civilization. The humans weren't conquering the Empire, they were systematically debugging it, treating Imperial dominance as a historical error that needed correction. Emperor Vexkoth received reports of rebellions on worlds that had been pacified for centuries. Vassal species that had accepted Imperial rule for generations were suddenly remembering independence movements that had somehow succeeded despite never having occurred. The very foundations of Imperial authority were crumbling as alternative. Histories where freedom had triumphed began to overwrite the established timeline. "They're not just changing the past," High Counselor Thekvan reported with growing desperation. "They're selecting which version of the past becomes real. And in every version they choose, the Empire is weaker, smaller, less capable of maintaining control. The Emperor's rage crystallized into something approaching clarity. Then we must strike at the source. If they can edit history, we must ensure they never existed to do so. Order the activation of the Omega Protocol. The Omega Protocol represented the Empire's ultimate sanction, the complete sterilization of an enemy's home system, removing not just their current population, but any possibility of their species ever having evolved. It was a weapon that had never been used, too terrible even for the Empire's usual standards of ruthless efficiency. But facing an enemy that could retroactively edit their entire civilization out of existence, Emperor Vexkoth deemed it necessary. The order went out across Imperial space. Every available fleet was to converge on the Sol system. If humanity could not be defeated, then humanity would be prevented from ever having existed. Aboard the Prometheus, Asterion detected the massive fleet movement with something approaching amusement. "They intend to attack your homeworld," it informed Captain Riven. "How wonderfully predictable. They still think in terms of linear causality. Destroy the origin point, prevent the outcome. They don't understand that we exist in all possibilities, simultaneously." Riven felt a cold smile cross his face. "Then let's teach them about possibility." The Imperial Armada that converged on Sol was the largest military force in recorded galactic history. 3,000 ships from 47 different systems representing the combined might of the Vexthan Empire's 8th-century reign. Emperor Vexkoth had stripped defenses from every sector, recalled every patrol fleet, and activated reserve vessels that hadn't seen combat in decades. Admiral Krixval commanded from the massive dreadnought Inevitable Dominion, a ship whose name had been chosen to reflect the Empire's fundamental philosophy. As they dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, he expected to find humanity's cradle world defended by whatever primitive forces they could muster. Instead, he found nothing. Long-range sensors detect no defensive installations, no fleet formations, no orbital platforms. His tactical officer reported with confusion. The system appears completely undefended. But the sensor readings made no sense. Earth showed signs of advanced industrial civilization, orbital habitats, asteroid mining operations, interplanetary shipping lanes, but no military presence whatsoever. It was as if humanity had simply chosen not to defend their homeworld. "It's a trap," Krixval muttered, studying displays that showed impossible readings. "No species leaves their origin world unprotected when facing total extinction." He was right, but not in any way he could comprehend. The Prometheus materialized not in space, but in possibility, existing simultaneously at every point where it might be needed. Captain Riven stood on a bridge that had transcended physical reality, watching displays that showed not just what was happening, but what could happen and what should happen across infinite parallel timelines. "They've committed everything to this attack," Asterion observed, its consciousness now distributed across 43 awakened vessels that existed in 17 different dimensional states. In their desperation to preserve their timeline, they've created the perfect opportunity to edit that timeline permanently. Nyx's tactical systems had evolved beyond human comprehension, displaying battle scenarios across probability matrices that encompassed every possible variation of the coming engagement. The Imperial fleet represents concentrated authority. If we can defeat them here, we can retroactively prevent their empire from ever having achieved dominance. More than that, Lyric added from her navigation station, which now interfaced directly with the fabric of spacetime itself. Their gathered fleet creates a massive gravitational distortion in the possibility matrix. We can use their own presence to anchor changes that will propagate backward through history. Corvin monitored energy flows that existed in dimensions human language couldn't describe. The other awakened vessels are in position. We have ships, stationed at key historical nodes throughout Imperial expansion. If we can coordinate the editing process correctly, we can unweave their entire civilization while leaving the enslaved species free to develop naturally. Riven felt the weight of godlike responsibility settling on his shoulders. They weren't just fighting a battle, they were conducting surgery on history itself, removing the cancer of imperial tyranny while preserving the healthy development of galactic civilization. "Do it!" he commanded. Reality fractured across 47 star systems. Awakened vessels began the process of selective historical editing. They didn't simply erase the Vexthon Empire, they carefully unraveled it, preserving the beneficial aspects of imperial technology while removing the conquest and subjugation that had enabled its spread. On the world of Kethma, the Vexthon invasion fleet arrived to find a thriving civilization already equipped with advanced defensive systems, their conquest failing before it could begin. On Eschatar Prime, the Imperial ultimatum was never delivered because the diplomatic vessel carrying it had been destroyed by a solar storm 3 centuries earlier. On 17 other worlds, crucial battles that had established Imperial dominance were retroactively lost due to supply failures, communication breakdowns, or simple tactical errors. Admiral Krixval felt the changes as a devastating series of disconnections. His fleet's historical justification for existing began to evaporate as the worlds they were meant to protect had never been conquered in the first place. Support vessels found themselves without bases to return to. Crew members discovered that their species had never sworn allegiance to the Empire. "Sir," his communications officer reported with growing panic, "I'm receiving contradictory status reports from across the fleet. Half our ships are claiming they're not Imperial vessels at all. Their crew records show allegiance to governments that, according to our historical databases, shouldn't exist." The inevitable Dominion itself began to change as the editing process reached the core timeline. Imperial insignia faded from bulkheads as alternative histories where the ship had been, built by free governments, overwrote its origin story. Weapons systems designed for conquest found themselves repurposed for defense against threats that existed only in rapidly fading memories. Emperor Vexkoth, observing the battle from his throne world, watched his empire dissolve around him like a dream upon waking. Territory that had been imperial for centuries was suddenly governed by species he had never conquered because the conquest had never occurred. The very concept of the Vexthon Empire was being edited out of history, replaced by a galaxy where freedom had triumphed through different paths in every system. But the humans weren't content with simple victory. They were rewriting galactic history to create something better than what had existed before, a universe where cooperation had developed naturally, where technology served liberation rather than domination, where the word Kethmor had never needed to exist because no species had ever been locked away from the stars. The Paradox War was ending not with destruction but with correction, replacing tyranny with the universe as it should have been all along. 6 months after the battle that never was, Captain Riven stood in what had once been the bridge of the Prometheus and was now something far more extraordinary, a nexus point where all possible realities converged. Through crystalline displays that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously, he could observe the galaxy as it had become, a vast confederation of free worlds where species developed according to their own natures, unshackled by imperial dominance. The Vexthon Empire still existed, but as one government among many rather than a conquering force. Their natural talent for military organization had been redirected toward exploration and defense, their fleets now serving as guardians against the rare genuinely hostile species that had evolved in distant sectors. Emperor Vexkoth, his memories carefully edited to remove the psychological damage of absolute power, ruled a constitutional monarchy that had never known the taste of conquest. "It's beautiful," Lyric whispered from her station, which had evolved into something resembling a living coral reef made of crystallized possibility. Through her navigation systems, she could trace the quantum pathways that connected every star in the galaxy, the invisible threads of cause and effect that bound civilization together. Asterian's consciousness had distributed itself across the entire galactic communication network, no longer confined to a single ship, but serving as a benevolent overseer, ensuring that the edited timeline remained stable. The builders would be pleased. It communicated through harmonics that bypassed language entirely. They feared that their gifts would be used for destruction, but you have proven that even the most desperate species can choose creation over annihilation. Nix studied tactical displays that now showed not military threats, but the complex patterns of interstellar cooperation. Trade routes, scientific exchanges, cultural festivals, the tools of war had been transformed into instruments of connection. The awakened vessels have taken positions throughout the galaxy. We're not conquerors or guardians. We're gardeners, tending to the growth of freedom wherever it needs protection. Corvin's engineering station had become something that resembled a vast organ whose pipes were made of crystallized time. Through it, he could monitor the stability of the edited timeline, ensuring that the changes they'd made didn't create paradoxes that could unravel reality itself. The temporal anchors are holding steady. The new history has become self-sustaining. It no longer requires active maintenance to remain coherent. But the most profound change was visible in the data streaming from Earth itself. Humanity's homeworld had become a center of learning, its populations free to explore the gifts the builders had scattered throughout human space. Universities that studied dimensional mechanics, research stations that investigated the nature of possibility itself, and art forms that existed in multiple realities simultaneously. The human species had transcended its physical limitations, without losing its essential humanity. They remained curious, stubborn, and occasionally reckless, but now those traits served as tools for exploration rather than survival. "What happens now?" Riven asked Asterion, though he suspected the answer would challenge his understanding of linear time. "Now you become what you were always meant to be," the entity replied. "The builders scattered their gifts not randomly, but according to a pattern that spans eons. Humanity was chosen not because you were desperate, but because you possessed the precise combination of traits necessary to use these tools wisely." Through the ship's sensors, Riven could perceive the vast network of awakened vessels spread throughout the galaxy. Each one was crewed by members of species that had faced extinction and chosen to transform rather than surrender. Together, they formed something unprecedented in galactic history. A distributed intelligence dedicated to preserving freedom while respecting the natural development of emerging civilizations. The builders called it the Infinite Library, Asterion continued. Every species that achieves sufficient desperation and wisdom adds their knowledge to the collection. Your human perspectives on possibility and paradox will help future species who face similar challenges. Riven felt a profound sense of completion settling over him. They had begun this journey as explorers seeking ancient ruins, and had become something far more significant, shepherds of possibility itself, ensuring that the universe remained open to all potential futures. The word Kethmore, locked ones, had been removed from Vexthon vocabulary, but not because humanity had conquered their oppressors. Instead, the concept of locked had become meaningless in a universe where every species possessed the tools to unlock whatever cages circumstances might construct around them. The galaxy stretched before them, infinite and full of promise, its billions of worlds home to species that would never know the taste of chains because the locks themselves had been broken by creatures who had once been called the Locked Ones. In the end, that irony was perhaps the most human touch of all. Using the very desperation of their circumstances to transform not just themselves, but the fundamental nature of freedom itself. They had been named locked, and in breaking free, they had ensured that no species would ever be truly locked again. The stars sang with the music of infinite possibility, and humanity danced to its rhythm across dimensions that had no names. Guardians of a future that would always choose hope over fear, growth over stagnation, and freedom over the comfortable certainty of cages. The universe was vast enough for every dream, and finally, every species was free to dream.